Nwachukwu, and these are the top stories. U.S. government affirms no plans for military base in Nigeria amid troops withdrawal from Niger. Supreme Court takes final decision on Kogi governorship election. Thugs attack Murtala Ajaka at Supreme Court. Kudirat Kekere Ekun blocked from the United States for corruption charges emerges Chief Justice of Nigeria. Wale Tinubu announces Oando's takeover of all Oando and Eni assets in Nigeria. Details now. The news begins with the United States government reiterating that it has no intention of establishing a military base in Nigeria following the withdrawal of American troops from Niger. This was confirmed by the element lead for coordination at U.S. Africa Command AFRICOM, Major General Kenneth Ekman, during a press briefing in Abuja early today. He acknowledged that the presence of U.S. forces can raise concerns due to the associated cost and benefit, but he reassured the public that no discussion are ongoing between the United States and Nigerian authorities about setting up a military base in Nigeria. He also acknowledged that the presence of U.S. forces can raise concerns in this matter. However, there are no plans for a U.S. base in Nigeria, recognizing the popular concerns, recognizing that the presence of U.S. forces comes with costs and benefits depending on the context, but reassuring that there were no plans. General Ekman clarified that his visit to Nigeria was not connected to any plans for a U.S. base, but rather focused on addressing security challenges in the Sahel region. Now, the Supreme Court today, the 23rd of August, Usman Ododo as the duly elected governor of Kogi State. The ruling of the Supreme Court brings to an end the legal processes challenging the outcome of the November 11, 2023 governorship elections in the state. In a judgment authored and read by Justice Sadiq Umar, a five-man panel of the Apex Court affirmed the election victory of Ododo, who contested on the platform of the All Progressives Congress. The court ruled that the appeal by the Social Democratic Party and its candidate Yakubu Murtala Ajaka was without merit and proceeded to dismiss it. All three issues identified for determination in the appeal were resolved against the appellants. Justice Sadiq Umar, who read the lead judgment, held that since the preliminary objection failed against the competence of the appeal was meritorious, it was of no use for the court to consider other issues raised in the appeal. He proceeded to dismiss the appeal and awarded a cost of 5 million naira against the appellants and in favor of the respondents. Now, the governorship candidate of the Social Democratic Party in the November 2023 Kogi state election, Murtala Ajaka, was attacked at the Supreme Court today. VOP News gathered that Ajaka was attacked by suspected hoodlums shortly after the court declared Usman Ododo of the All Progressives Congress as the duly elected governor of the state. Now, as earlier reported, the Supreme Court dismissed the appeal filed by Ajaka and his party for lack of merit and substance. Justice Kudirat Kekere Ekun, who was denied entry to the United States following a 2020 controversial judgment that declared APC's Hope Uzodinma as Imo governor, has been appointed the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Ms. Kekere Ekun, 66, took over the reins of the Nigerian Judiciary in an acting capacity from Justice Kaide Ariwola, who clocked the mandatory retirement age of 70 on Thursday. The National Judicial Council recommended Ms. Kekere Ekun as the Judiciary Chief in a meeting last week, as setting the seat was too crucial to be left vacant. Application of Ms. Kekere Ekun, who was among a panel of justices that sacked PDP's Emeka Ihedioha from the Imo governorship seat and pronounced Mr. Uzodinma winner of the hotly contested post. Now, former Cross River Governor Donald Duke also alluded to the incident in his memoir. The former governor stressed that the jurists who intended to visit the U.S. to attend a legal conference were barred, while their accompanying aides were issued visas. Elsewhere, Oando PLC on Thursday announced its acquisition of Nigerian Ajib Oil Company from Italian energy major Eni. According to Oando's press statement, they are including reimbursement and consideration for the assets. Speaking on the brokered deal, Oando's CEO, Wale Tinubu, the president's nephew, said it was the culmination of 10 years of toil, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the realization of ambition since the 2014 entry into the joint venture via the acquisition of ConocoPhillips' Nigerian portfolio. He added that the company will continue to pursue strategic diversification opportunities within the broader energy sector that provides enhanced growth and value creation for stakeholders, particularly in clean energy. But Mr. Tinubu was silent on how Oando was a struggling business before his uncle Bola Tinubu became Nigeria's president in May 2023 and swiftly moved to cut deals that helped the firm at the nation's expense. Now, People's Gazette had reported earlier this year how the Tinubus were discussing Owando's takeover of ENI's Nigerian assets in exchange for ENI's repossession of the lucrative OPL 245 oil field in Nigeria in partnership with Shell. Both Oando and ENI denied any wrongdoing in separate statements to the Gazette, but State Petroleum Minister Heineken Lokobere confirmed the questionable deal and said they were in Nigeria's interest. You're currently listening to the World News at 6 on Voice of the People 90.3 FM. We'll take a very short break. When we return, we'll head into a news analysis segment. This time, I'm right here in the studio with Mr. Chukwuma Okoro, who is a political and national affairs commentator. He's also one of the top-selling authors of one of the controversial political books in Africa. To stay with us. Welcome back. This is still the World News at 6 right here on Voice of the People 90.3 FM. Mr. Chukwuma Okoro, good evening and thank you for joining us on the World News at 6.
Good evening, Esther, and thanks for having me.
Yes, Mr. Chukwuma, you're here because this is our news analysis segment. We usually bring in people of your capacity to give us their own political, or would I say intellectual insight or angles to some of the stories that we read out on the World News at 6. And one of the ones that we cannot do without talking about is NJC today, and that is Justice Kudirat Motomori Olatokunbo Kekere Ekun, who was sworn in as the Chief Justice of Nigeria today. Now, the reason why she is a topic of conversation across the country is concerning the ruling that took place in 2020 of Hope Uzodinma, and there was quite a controversy about that ruling. Now, we know that one of the hiatus of her being the Chief Justice of Nigeria is the fact that she's the second female justice to hold this esteemed position. And I remember Justice Fagbemi, the Chief Justice, the Minister of Justice of the Federation, was saying something that there's going to be sanitization within the Nigerian judiciary. Even she, during her, when she was being shaken by the president today, said that there'll be a couple of reforms within the NJC. But Huriwa is saying they don't expect anything different because of her past, stories or incidents that followed. Now, let's take a little brief on some of the cases she has presided over, right? That is quite controversial. The case between Hope Uzodinma versus Emeka Ihedioha, 2019 Imo State gubernatorial election. Now, apparently, Justice Kekere Ekun that declared Uzodinma the winner based on the inclusion of results from 388 polling units that had previously been excluded. Now, this controversial decision was delivered on January 2020. She presided over it. The second is the case of Adeleke versus Oyetola Osun State governorship election. This was a dispute. Adeleke challenged the election results, alleged irregularities and misconduct, while Justice Kekere Ekun was part of the panel of justices that affirmed the election of Gboyega Oyetola as the governor of Osun State and dismissed the appeal filed by Adeleke. All right. Now, the third is Nyesom Wike versus Dakuku Peterside, 2015 River State governorship election. She was part of the Supreme Court panel that upheld Nyesom Wike's election as the governor of River State, dismissing Peterside's appeal and affirming the election's compliance with the law. Now, what also made it a matter of controversy is the fact that while she was trying to go for a conference in the United States, she was denied visa entry, and these were some of these issues that culminated to that. What would you say about this development?
Esther, you've already said all that needs to be said. You have mentioned the number of controversial cases that either she delivered or she was part of the Supreme Court or panel of judges justices that delivered the judgment. It's kind of interesting to see that to see what we have become actually in this country, to the extent that somebody who is carrying this kind of baggage, to be very sincere, someone who is carrying this kind of baggage is propped up, as our Chief Justice, the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Nigeria happens to be Africa's, the world's largest black country, and Africa looks up to us. The black race looks up to Nigeria, and somehow we are disappointing. Like, it just what I like words to say. The Attorney General of Nigeria and Minister of Justice said that they are going to that she's going to carry out some reforms in the judiciary. That is welcome. But I also know the fact that the outgoing CJN even told Kekere Ekun, this and this and this are what you are supposed to do in the judiciary. And we begin to ask, why couldn't Ariola himself carry out those reforms? Is it that he was hampered? Is it that he was hamstrung? Or what? What are the issues? And I heard despite the fact that Ariola himself was carrying a lot of baggage, all of us know what happened during the 2023 presidential elections and all of that, how somebody was smuggled to the UK on a wheelchair and there was no rebuttal of that particular incident, and how
the appointment of his family members,
his children in the judiciary, so much conflict of interest, within the judiciary. And we are propping up this woman. Look at the case you mentioned, the case of the Hope Uzodimma, which is very clear. How could number 4 suddenly become number 1? And the judiciary was, there was turbulence. Lawyers very excellent, very brilliant.
As the NJC, there's a possibility that she being appointed, the NJC could have an influence over that. I think some of the Labour Party members are asking that their supporters should pray that because right now that she's now being appointed as the NJC, that it could influence whatever evidence they have to prove otherwise.
Esther, beyond prayers, members of the Labour Party should also know that the Supreme Court is more like a terminal. Their jurisdiction is terminal.
Okay.
Any case you have in Nigeria, whether it comes from the High Court, State High Court, Federal High Court, the Appeal Court, and it gets to the Supreme Court, it terminates there. Their decision is final.
No, but they were able to provide some compelling evidence to prove otherwise, and they said they were going to receipt on the matter.
That same thing happened.
Yes.
During the 2023 presidential elections. At a point, Atiku Abubakar procured fresh evidence from the United States concerning the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
He had compelling evidence, and when he presented it to the Supreme Court said, well, we have the discretion to accept this evidence. It is discretionary. The law permits us to accept it as admissible in evidence or not. And the Supreme Court stood it down because the Supreme Court, in this case that you are mentioning, clearly cannot reverse itself.
Okay.
I don't see how the Supreme Court will reverse itself. Meanwhile, the same Hope Uzodimma is already serving a second term. So like beyond prayers, Labour Party members should come to reality. They should be realistic. Coupled with that, nothing is going to come out of it. Nothing. Coupled with the fact that this said very woman who presided over the Hope Uzodimma case is now the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Beyond being the Chief Justice of Nigeria, she now heads the National Judicial Council. Even if she doesn't sit on that matter, she is the one that will appoint the judges that will sit on the matter.
And on the matter, let's look at the situation where 2027 is upcoming. Whether we like it or not, a couple of people think it's too far, but a couple of conspiracy theorists and political analysts who have been speaking about recent trends within this administration are saying that the ground is now being watered ahead of that. They're saying, for example, that some very vital sectors that determines how the election would turn out are already being pocketed by the ruling administration. The judiciary, according to them, with the appointment of Justice Kudirat, as well as the INEC sector, that is the Independent National Electoral Commission as well, which of course they feel has been pocketed. That the only institution left is the NLC, which they're already trying to possibly hold at the jugular or close up their mouth. And that with this particular situation, how do we ensure, or how are we certain that the general elections upcoming in 2027 will be transparent, as a lot of Nigerians are expecting it will be, or different from what took place in 2023?
Esther, the work for 2027 started beyond now. You have mentioned the NLC. I don't have faith in the NLC. I'm not sure NLC is going to do anything. They also have become self-serving. But you talk about the CJN and the judiciary. Well, I will agree with you to the extent that this thing, the plans have been made. It's more like something predetermined.
Okay.
Then you didn't mention the police. There are plans to extend the tenure
of the IGP
beyond 2027. So if you put all these things together, you're able to, trace the dots. You know, it's like there's a thread leading to somewhere. They're trying to put a thread inside a needle to sew something. And that is what Nigerians should be clearly aware of. You know, if you ask me what Nigerians to do, well, it depends on Nigerians. If they want it to stay, it will stay. I said the other day in this station, Pharaoh, Egyptians asked Pharaoh, why did you turn a tyrant? He said, because no one stopped me. So if Nigerians don't stop,
then we should respect tyranny.
In 2020.
Well, Mr. Chukwuma, let's go on to the NNPCL. It was quite what you would call a blockbuster, an expose, a couple of thoughts, deep thoughts that a couple of people had not thought about came up. Now, just yesterday, right, Oando PLC announced its acquisition of Nigerian Ajib Oil Company from Italian energy major Eni. According to the press statement, the acquisition is worth $783 million. Now, the CEO is the president's nephew, and that's Wale Tinubu, and he said it's a combination of 10 years of toil, resilience, and unwavering belief in the realization of their ambition since the 2014 entry into the joint venture. But there was a question. He was silent on how Oando, a struggling business before his uncle, President Tinubu, became the president in May 2023, swiftly moved to cut deals that helped the firm at the nation's expense. Let me take you back again. It's quite important for us to understand what this conversation is all about. Now, because of all this whole thing, a lot of conversation came up that we're saying that the president already owns Nigeria's oil, the NNPC Limited. Are we saying now it's been owned by one person? Are we saying a cabal is now running the government? What exactly is happening? Clarifications were needed. Now, this is what happened. OVH acquisition, of course, you know, 49% owned by Wale Tinubu, or the Tinubus, actually had to make a statement. They said that the president is not involved in the acquisition, but it failed to address key issues. Now, this is what happened. When they were asked if your company was trying to survive, how did NNPCL, that supposedly bought OVH, now OVH is now the company that owns NNPCL. So this is the thing. Based on the report that came out by Premium Times, the controversial purchase of OVH Energy Marketing Limited, and how the purchased company eventually took over the management of the buyer, that is NNPC. NNPC initially bought OVH, but now OVH is now in charge of NNPC, and they called it the most ridiculous business acquisition in the world. So in June, three firms, NNPC Retail, OVH and Niue Oil, they jointly filed a petition at the Federal High Court in Lagos. In it, they asked the court to grant 8 orders, which include an order that NNPC Retail be dissolved without being wound up, and that the resultant company from the scheme shall be OVH. They also asked that all the tax attributes, unutilized capital allowances, tax losses, withholding tax credits, and other refunds available should all be given to OVH Energy Marketing, subject to the terms and conditions set. The court granted all 8 orders, and they ordered that the measure be effective from the 1st of January. The court also ordered that all necessary incidental, consequential, and supplemental orders be made to ensure the full and effective implementation of the measure. In other words, the retail arm of the NNPCL will be owned by OVH, headed by the president's nephew. Now, this is where the conspiracy theory came on. Are we saying that the president and his family now owns the block well of most of the, at least a majority of the block well that Nigerians own, that the family now owns it? Questions are now being asked. Where is the Niger Delta in this? Why are they not saying anything? Why are Nigerians keeping quiet? What exactly is this whole business deal about?
Okay, Esther, let's be very clear on this.
All right, okay.
Let's be very clear on this. There are 2 issues that you have raised.
Okay.
One is Oando acquiring
Ajib and Eni.
Eni and Philip Konoko.
Yes.
That's one thing.
Yes.
That's a different thing. Then the other issue is the
OVH.
OVL, you know, acquiring the
NNPCL retail.
Yes, the retail. So let's be very clear on that. On the Oando acquiring Eni and all of that, I have followed Wale Tinubu's career. You know, he's done well for himself.
Okay.
You know, he's struggled as a young man.
All right.
You know? Whether people have supported him or not, I give it to him. He's done well. And the transaction between Oando and Eni, I see it more like a business something, you know, between...
Devoid of his relationship with the president.
This man just became president last year.
Okay.
But like I said, Wale himself has done well for himself. I give it to him. Struggling young man, you know, very brilliant, you know. Companies struggle, businesses struggle. There are ups and downs in businesses. It could be a coincidence that, well, somehow they can raise money.
In 1 year.
No, yes, they can raise money. I'm not trying to, I'm speaking from what I know, things that happen.
Okay.
You get the point. So that one is clearly a business transaction.
All right.
You know, between Eni and Oando. However they went about it, that's their business as far as I'm concerned. Where I have issues is the OVL now, being in control of NNPCL's retail arm. That looks more like a conflict of interest.
The way it is right now, all NNPC retail outlets are owned by Wale Tinubu or OVH. Yes.
You know, that is where it comes in. You know, that is where the conflict of interest comes in.
Yeah.
Because, one, this particular transaction is even against the Federal Competitive and Consumer Protection Act of 2028, which is more like Nigeria's antitrust regulation. You know, what is antitrust regulation? Antitrust regulation is just, you know, to ensure it prohibits deliberate creation of monopolies to stifle competition. You know, that is, this is what has happened, to the extent that, you know, that NNPCL is the sole importer of refined petroleum, refined fuel into Nigeria. Now, what has happened is that OVHL will be the sole importer and the sole distributor at the same time. So that is more like creating a monopoly in the oil industry, in a situation where we are trying to not just liberalize, but to deregulate and push in more operators into the industry, you know, so that you create fair competition and begin to look at the consequences, the economics of demand and supply. That is where the conflict comes in. It is clearly a violation of the FCCPA, you know. And I've spoken to a couple of lawyers, and some of them have said, look, well, I think it's good to challenge this thing in court. It shouldn't happen because it's a violation. So you will see in the coming days, people taking OVH to court, people taking NNPCL to court. You know, if you cannot sue the individuals involved, these are corporate entities that you can take them to court.
In the decision making of the NNPCL, are Nigerians part of the decision making? If NNPC, okay, for example, NNPC Limited is supposedly meant to be a privately owned, and they say it's also Nigerian owned. In the decision making process, does it feel or look like it's Nigerian owned, or it's owned by certain individuals or a certain set of persons? Well,
the setup, the structure we see is that it is owned by Nigerians.
Okay.
We have the Federal Ministry of Finance Incorporated.
Okay.
You know, it's a shareholder in NNPCL. One other company, one other federal ministry, on top of my head, I can't remember now, is also a shareholder in NNPCL Limited. If you look at the structure, it's like more than 80% owned by the government.
By the government?
Yes,
the government which represents the people.
Which represents the people.
Okay.
I think the concerns you should have is that part of the idea behind changing NNPC as a corporation,
okay,
you know, as a corporation, a behemoth, you know, which it is in the oil industry, and moving it to a private limited liability company so that it will be able to go public. You know, it will go public and sell shares to Nigerians.
Exactly.
That is where the issue of the Niger Delta comes in. You know, that is where the issue of Niger Delta comes in.
All right, let's say this. The former vice president and presidential candidate of PDP, Atiku Abubakar, was the one who expressed astonishment at the operations of the NNPC Limited and how the government-owned oil company had put its retail arm under the control of OVH, a company he claims is owned by Oando, led by Wale Tinubu, a relative of the president. He also regretted his intention to privatize the NNPC and increase its transparency has been overshadowed by what he describes as the criminal hijack of the NNPC by corporate cabals around the current president. So following this controversial deal, Atiku said Mele Kyari, the NNPC boss, was controversially retained as NNPC Group Managing Director despite his incompetence. Now, a couple of people feel that with what transpired within the NNPC, immediately the president came on board, there was a huge sacking. Persons were asked to leave, but they were surprised that Mele Kyari remained on board. And there were a couple of, expose as to why he remained on board. He was able to help smoothing certain things. So with this particular situation, right now being talked about. We're expecting that the NNPCL should come and tell us something if that is indeed true, and under whose purview. What decision-making process was followed? Who were the persons involved? At whose interest? Was it at the interest of Nigerians or certain persons making decisions for Nigerians? And what do Nigerians intend to benefit from this, whereby all the retail arms of the NNPCL is now headed by OVH, meaning that all the NNPC retail stations in the country now belongs to the president's nephew or OVH Incorporated?
The fact has been established that it is a violation of Nigerian laws, for OVH to now own NNPCL's retail outlet. It's a clear violation of the Nigerian law. If you talk about how Mele Kyari was retained and people were sacked and all of that, like I said, like a few minutes ago, the federal government still owns more than 80% of what you have as NNPCL.
Okay.
It's like a government running a business. It is not clearly public. And the government, being the owner, decides who stays, who goes.
So they can run it anyhow they feel like.
That is the way they are running.
And it could be to be detriment of Nigerians.
As it is now.
Could this be the reason why we're having the scarcity of the products, increment
of course,
in fuel price?
You don't need to travel far to see that NNPC is behind. The oil industry is in a mess. It's in a terrible mess. Unfortunately for us, our president happens to be the petroleum minister. And the NNPCL, it's more like... it's a behemoth, behemoth around the oil industry, more like a Leviathan. It's very big. You can't push it, It's our cash cow. NNPC is in control. Unfortunately, their accounts are opaque. They collect money, they don't remit. Today they tell us they made profit. Next tomorrow they tell us they are in debt and all of that.
Exactly.
And like between 2023 and this year, I think they said they earmarked 2.7 trillion naira for salaries and overhead. 2.7 trillion naira. That's huge. That's a lot of money.
That's a huge amount of money.
And they run refineries that are not productive. Refineries maintain an officialdom. You have a managing director, you have executive directors, you have staff who go there every day, do nothing, sit and tell stories and go back.
And then they collect their salaries.
So the reason why NNPC was deconstructed,
supposedly,
deconstructed was to make sure that the NNPCL runs like a business enterprise, runs like a bank, runs like one big pharmaceutical company, one big brewery that has a managing director, and at the end of the day, they do AGM. The board of directors, the shareholders meet and say, okay, this particular management has done well. Let us retain them. Or the board of directors will sit down and say, no, we can't continue with this. We didn't make profit and all of that. So let's change the management. That hasn't happened. So it's still under the control of the government. So the government, like any other thing we have, does whatever it likes with the NNPCL.
That's quite unfortunate, to be honest with you. And I think questions needs to be asked.
Nigerians
and I'm asking questions. A lot of people don't understand what is at stake. They just hear oil. It's too, will I say, the grammar or the technical language involved could be so huge. A couple of people don't even understand how this really affects them. Most of our oil wells have been used as trade by barter with some foreign companies. But most of our oil wells have been sold to upfront, supposedly to collect loans, to get loans. Most of the loans that we're asking for, the oil wells are, basically as a means to which this we can allocate to you while you give us these loans. In the interim, we pay back, and then you distance yourself or you disentangle yourself from it. And literally, the ones that are operated by Nigerians that we have direct access to, we cannot tell what we're making. Profit is not being told about it. No remuneration, no audits. Nobody's telling us what is going on. But we hear this is the amount of money. We hear this is what's going on. They just choose to tell us what they want to tell us. But we obviously don't know what is going on in there.
That is what happens when government runs businesses in Nigeria. But if you go elsewhere, government run businesses. We have the Petronas. The Petronas is more like, in Petronas of Malaysia, it's more like Nigeria's NNPCL. If you ever travel to Kuala Lumpur, you see the Twin Tower, the tallest building. At a point, it was the tallest Twin Tower in the whole world. It was built from proceeds from Petronas.
That's the problem. If at all these oil wells are used for businesses, where are the proceeds of these businesses?
Exactly.
How is it reflecting on the people?
That is to tell you how poorly the NNPCL has been run. If you look at Statoil is the state oil of Norway, just like our own NNPC. They are doing very, very well. You talk about Petronas, Petrobras of Brazil. You talk
Exactly.
about Aramco of Saudi Arabia. Aramco posts profits.
Aramco is owned by the Sauds, right? They by the elite family.
No, Aramco is not. Aramco is the state oil of Saudi Arabia.
It's a state oil, but operated by the what I call it like a monarchy, right? The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They instituted it as themselves.
No. The kingdom is like you said. Nigeria owns.
Okay.
Aramco is a state oil of Saudi Arabia.
All right.
Last year, 2020, the year and they reported $500 billion profit. Aramco.
And they disclose the profits.
Yes, they disclose.
And they use it to revitalize the lives of the people.
The lives of the people.
So if that is being reflected, nobody would even ask questions as to what family is in charge of it or who is doing what or whatever. Even if they consider it to be a cabal kind of business, nobody cares so long as we're seeing the proceeds of them handling that of the people.
But that doesn't happen here. So that is why it's an issue. And someone asked the question now, if NNPCL goes public, someone asks, will you be interested in buying shares? They're considering that it is poorly run. Will you buy shares of NNPCL?
I won't buy shares when I'm not certain of how it is.
Do that. So the onus lies on us to continue to.
So the way it's been run has made it less attractive for those who may want to be part of the process.
No, the issue of being part of the process is that you should even do it in such a way, so that you redistribute it. It's like there's a lot of inequalities in the society.
Obviously.
You redistribute it so that it gets to the average Nigerian. Even if you have to do it, if you go to Niger Delta, NDDC, you allocate a certain percentage and say, okay, distribute it to the poor of the poor in those oil-bearing communities.
Okay.
In those oil-producing communities that have been devastated by exploitation, exploration, pollution, and all of that. Look at what is going on in Ogoni, for how many years now? After so much money, 1 billion naira, was earmarked for the cleaning up of Ogoni. Shell, the main culprit, paid their own 900 million naira. The Nigerian government that was supposed to pay 100 million naira has not paid up until
now.
Up until this moment.
Let's look at the situation that took place at the Supreme Court today. Apparently, Murtala Jaka, the governorship candidate of the Social Democratic Party in the off-season election, was attacked in the Supreme Court today. Now, the story said thugs, but others believe that it's APC supporters who were there's a video that's circulating online, and the video actually put out there. It was, I think I watched it on one of the television stations, where they were throwing from the Supreme Court, inside the Supreme Court. They were throwing stones at him, they were hitting him, they were asking him to go. Inside the Supreme Court, no fear, no recourse, no respect. Has it gotten to this point?
Esther, to be very honest with you, I have not seen the video, so I wouldn't know who is.
We actually have the video. I thought I sent it to
I've not seen the video,
okay.
So I wouldn't know who is behind it. But the point remains that our level of how can I put it now? Our level of restiveness, is growing by the day. Whether you call it restiveness or our level of assertiveness is growing to the extent that people don't even have regard for the law again. That is what happens when you have leadership that is irresponsible, so to say. That is what happens. And the fact is that when these things happen, we don't even try to retweak it to make sure that it doesn't happen again. If it happened like 2 or 3% today, the next time you see 5%, the other time you see 15%, to the extent that you see people. That is why we have non-state actors now competing with the state.
It is really sad. The recent emir or sultan that was abducted, the son who was recently released, though if a ransom was paid, said that it was a lawmaker who actually called out the hit. We're expecting the Nigerian police to investigate that matter and find out who this lawmaker is, who initially paid 5 million naira to these bandits who kidnapped this particular traditional leader and the people that killed the man. So again, the question is this: a lot is happening. How will this administration ensure that there is Nigerians begin to trust them? There's a lot of inconsistencies that doesn't really make sense if you want to logically look at it. So how do they repair their image? How do they let people trust them as an administration? 2027, whether we like it or not, is already close by.
Yes, what this government can do is to begin to do what they say. If you make a promise, fulfill that promise. If you're unable to fulfill that promise, go ahead of people and say, look, I promise to do this.
Okay.
Unfortunately, because of certain variables, finances, economic downturn, insecurity, weather or whatever, I'm unable to meet this particular promise. The people will believe you. But the situation where you tell people one thing and do
another thing,
the trust begins to go down, precipitously.
That's true.
That is the issue. Another issue is that the handlers of this government, both the Minister of Information, the spokespersons of the president, should stop behaving as if we are still in an election period. Elections are over. This is a period of governance. People want to see their standards of living improve. People want to see their incomes, soar. People want to see their purchasing power soar. People want to see food on their table. People want to be able to walk into hospitals and get treated. People want to for children to go to school and learn, People want to travel from one part of the country, one end of the country, to the other without molestation, without fear, without being kidnapped, and without being killed. That is one way this government can restore confidence. And the people that handle the government's communications should learn to.
You're speaking to Bayo Nanuko, obviously.
Yes, Bayo in particular, and what I call the third force media, people who try to support the government expecting something or the other. People like Daniel Bwala, and Reno Omokiri, people who had caused this particular president years back, like 2 or 3 years.
Said a lot of stuff.
Said a lot of things about him, and they are the one now saying that he's the best thing that ever happened to this country. The government should also stop seeing anybody, any contrarian, as an opposition.
Or a critic as an opposition. Or wanting to silence anybody that makes any dissenting statement against them.
You don't convert a man by merely silencing.
Mr. Chukwumakoro, we've actually run out of time. We've actually taken more time. I sincerely do appreciate your input on the World News at 6 today. Thank you so much for giving us and shedding more light, educating us on some of these intricacies. I sincerely do appreciate your input.
Thanks for having me, Esther.
All right, to wrap up, here again are the top stories. U.S. government affirms no plans for military base in Nigeria amid troops withdrawal from Niger. Supreme Court takes final decision on Kogi governorship election at Jakarta at Supreme Court. Kudirat Kekere Okun blocked from U.S. for judicial corruption emerges Chief Justice of Nigeria, while Tinubu announces Owando's takeover of all Ajib ENI assets in Nigeria. That's a wrap on the World News at 6. My name is Esther Wachuku, and my guest was Chukwumakoro. Thank you for staying with us.